All right, back again. I hope you are all still continuing to, and your families are all continuing to be well and safe as can be. And we're gonna start winding this thing down. Two more lectures and one the last exam, and we are done. So, of course, the next two, this today and the next lecture, both have two chapters. So please don't please complete the quizzes. You're too late for this one already, but remember, there's two chapters each lecture. So we're going to do 12 and 13 today and 14 and 15 next time. So this format's going to stay the same. I'm going to bring up the slides and then we will go on. Okay. So, all right. Excuse me. All right, here we are. Sexual development throughout life, right? So the learning objectives are how do we, human beings are sexually beings from birth, right? And that's how do we develop from birth all the way through to death as sexual beings? Where are we in that phase, right? So we're going to talk about that. Childhood sexual development, right? Adolescence, puberty, sex education, right? We're going to look at summarizing I'm going to try to keep the slides up with the thing, with my talk, right? Summarizing main issues in college, moving on to young adulthood, what happens often in college during this among students no longer living at home, etc. How adult relationships different from your high school relationships, right? And moving on and starting to move on into adulthood with menopause and the changes, physical changes that start happening to people as they age. Sex among older adults and what that means, you know, like I said, we're sexual beings until we die. And how do our relationships change around that? Right. So the first thing we're going to look at, of course, is Freud. Right. For many, many years, Freud was the guy. Most people do not agree with his concepts and haven't for a while, but when they came out, he was the guy, right? And so he had his psychosexual development, including the Oedipus complex, where he says boys 3 to 4 years of old age had sexual desires for their mother, and the Electra complex, where girls have penis envy, right? So, but you know, he also let's see. Right, so he had Freud is based on the id, the superego, and the ego, where the id, of course, is your primal instinct, and your superego is your morals and your moral compass, I guess, and your ego is the balance between the two. How do you balance your animal instincts and our ancient instincts against the modern world and morals and ethics, etc., and society's rules, really, basically, right? So he had the very first stage is the oral stage, birth to 1 year. Everything, of course, is surrounding the mouth, big bottles, suckling. The anal stage, when we move on, years 1 to 3, we're actually learning about how to control our bowels, how to use potty training, basically, etc. The 1 3 to 6, when we discover our genitals and our the erogenous zone, and that's actually, you know, babies, toddlers masturbate. Toddlers are known to masturbate. The latent period between 6 and puberty, where your superego is developing and the id is starting to be suppressed. Then the genital stage of from puberty to death. So those are Freud's things, and as I said today, they're not near as valid as they were thought to be when they came out. But here's what I said, right? So children masturbate. Most of us don't view toddlers as sexual beings, but they are. Right? And this, can become an issue. It typically doesn't, but it can. Toddlers have been known to masturbate in public, like all kinds of things happen. So if it becomes an issue, of course, there's ways to deal with it, just like everything else we deal with that toddlers do or don't do. Right, we redirect behavior, we do all kinds of things. However, of course, right, we talk about when things are not, right, normalcy, right, that's defined by society, and then what you need to look at. And when it says here certain sexual behavioral signals in children, and emphasize they know too much. Unfortunately, oftentimes that's due to some type of molest situation. But children playing doctor is not necessarily anything to worry outside the norm. Right? But you do have to be careful, right? There are things that are red flags, if nothing else, right? And then we've talked about this often, right? You learn, how do your children learn about sex? And obviously, anecdotally, I haven't actually done the research, but every year in class I ask, and for the most part, neither of these is true. Most kids do not have a talk with their parents, or their parents haven't had the talk with them. And there's not enough sex education in school. Like you guys are taking this in college, where you should have had it in high school and maybe even junior high school, right? Hopefully, the idea of one of the main goals out of this class is that you will certainly have the talk or a talk and be more open about talking about your sexuality with your children. And make it a norm and not the exception. Okay, so we will see how that happens over the years, right? So here it says that 89% of this reproductive system, right? So biology comes from school, right? If you look at this, right? But then the next, and it says 43% from parents, but I kind of find that hard to believe, right? But that's the reproductive system, the biological part. Where do we learn about intercourse? It says 82% in the school. I don't know where they actually did this study or anything, but I can tell you it's from what students have reported to me at Mountain House over the years it does not match up with this. However, I didn't read more. I didn't actually read the study. Maybe one of these days I will. But according to this, school seems to be, and parents are a big influence here. And most of you tell me that's not true. So the most important part of our sexual development, or maybe I don't know, certainly an interesting part of our sexual development is puberty, right? Early adolescence, middle adolescence, and late adolescence, right? So most of you are through this stage, if not all of you, are coming to the end. And so here is for chapter 12. This is your journal thing. Tell me 3 things you know now that you wish you knew when your puberty started. So that's your journal question for the week, for this chapter, not the week, this chapter. All right. 3 things you know now that are important and you wish you had known when puberty started. Okay. So, of course, adolescence is talking about our development. And we've talked about some of this stuff before about how alcohol and sex, alcohol and drugs compound this issue, can start compounding these issues during this period of time. We know that the STDs rate is highest among the 15 to 24-year-olds. And so this is some of the issues that we deal with. Social networking has certainly changed the face of puberty. And these, of course, are the biological things that happen to us during the changes. And these physical changes can be create very strong feelings, physical feelings, and then, of course, emotional feelings. So people are starting to become sexually active. Of course, there are a lot of potentially negative consequences, including STIs, unwanted pregnancies. Relationships can become emotionally all-consuming to some people, and cause a lot of distress. Oh, sorry. I need to go back here. Sorry. Oh, okay. So we talked about this, right? And some people become too emotionally dependent during their initial relationships. So here is reports of sexual activity, intercourse, particularly intercourse during high school. And as you can see, it's almost all 60% or above by the end of high school have had sex, have had intercourse. I mean, 60% of your fellow students and seniors in high school had intercourse of some kind, except Hispanic females, which are actually only at 59%. However, African American and Black seems to be the highest category in the 70s across the board. But it still doesn't matter, right? At least 60% of your friends have had the intercourse by the time you were seniors. Right, and then of course there is the issues we've all talked about, right? We talked about chapter 11, right? About all this and what happens and how destructive bullying and harassment is, how suicide rates are amongst gay, lesbian, bisexual students. All the issues that come along with those gender identities, right? Gender identities. And then, of course, as I said, right, the average age of first intercourse is between 15 and 17. Teens often engage in oral sex, thinking it's not sex, right? And then one of the consequences, of course, is pregnancy. We don't, people aren't paying attention. And if you look here at the birth rates, right, pregnancy rates from 91 to 2009 have gone down significantly. But birth rates are not so, this curve has not gone down so steeply, and neither has the abortion rates. Right? So though actual pregnancy rates and birth control is obviously part of that, has been a little bit more effective, it still does not stop the birth. It's not had a major effect on the birth rate and the abortion rates as we would probably like to see. Again, right, 15 to 24-year-olds can make up 50% of the STIs in America. And and oral sex can still pass an STI, of course, and people often have oral sex unprotected. And this was a survey of students, right? 14 to 17 in the yellow and 18 to 24. And the condom use actually goes down as you get older, which is probably not the best thing we want to see, but the best time is for males 14 to 17. You would like to see that at least more steady across the board, I would think. Okay, hang on a second. So, and then of course we have college, right? And while you're in college, you're still in that 15 to 24 group, right? So STIs are still running a little too high. And then we often add alcohol when people get away from home, or even people that stay home for school. Alcohol becomes a much bigger issue in college life for most people, and then it leads to riskier behaviors. Sexual activities in college. Maybe, hopefully you looked at this, but nothing too shocking there. So as we move into adulthood then, and out of college and look into more serious relationships, by then hopefully, well, not hopefully, I don't know. That's probably a bad thing to say. By then though, we are using less experimentation. We've typically our gender identity has been set. We have done enough experimentation to know what we like and don't like. We can still be open, but we feel like we are set. Our personality is more solidified, and our sexual philosophy and sexual identity are more solidified. Right? And we move into relationships, longer lasting relationships, including lifetime relationships, right? And those relationships include living together, right? It's being married, and then eventually marriage of some kind. And often nowadays, marriage is not viewed as necessary, but it is often around, like in the gay rights movement, marriage is around being able to share your benefits, work benefits often with people. And tax advantages and all the other things that go along with having children and then adulthood. Oftentimes it's a financial decision. Right. And then, of course, sex needs should continue during your marriage. It should not stop. I heard one people say, oftentimes people that are married have more sex than people are, right? They should. Here's sexual activity reported among men and women, but of course, once again, self-report, right? You have to take a look at self-report. So, and the validity of those answers all the time. And then, of course, there are issues that come along at every level, right? Of course. Excuse me. There are issues that go along with problems with adulthood, right? We start, many things can happen to change a person during the course of their lives. Some people lose their sexual desires. Some people have bigger issues about getting sexually aroused. Sex can become painful for a number of physical conditions, and then menopause, which is something all women go through, and is the big biological change that comes along with aging for women. And here's a list of all those, some of those issues we talked about, and what it looks like, and what percentage of people, the occurrence of those things, the frequency of those things. Right? But of course, we are, as I said in the beginning, we are sexual beings until death, and you know, you can keep going right through any age. It does not matter, right? There are ways to enjoy sex through any number of ways that don't always include intercourse, right? But many people are doing it till the end of their life at some point. And it certainly, you should, hopefully, for your relationship remains intimate on some level until it's over, whatever, however that ends. So, of course, right, we talked about the stages of sexual arousal and how that can last longer. The intensity of orgasms, etc., may not be what it used to is. And then, of course, as I've said, menopause is a huge issue for women, and major changes in their body along with this. And this is sexual reports of sexual behavior among older adults. So let's consider older adults up through the age of 85. But dating is still an issue among older adults. Many times you haven't dated in a long time and they start dating again, and it's just like trying it for the first time again, you know. Many of whom have never, you know, are doing online dating, you know. It's and it's not always a platonic relationship. And then actually sex in nursing homes is a big issue. Can be a huge issue for the staff, right? Not everybody. So it's just, I think for me, it's a funny situation. But I have had clients kicked out of nursing homes, asked to leave nursing homes because of their sexual activities. All right, so that's it. Sexuality and aging, chapter 12. And I guess we'll move right into chapter 13 if you give me a minute. Oh, whoa, no. Oh, I didn't even record. So, sorry, let me, here we are, chapter 13. All right, we will go into, that's not what I wanted. Here we are. Slideshow from the beginning. Of course, I didn't get my notes, maybe, but we will move on. So chapter 13, human sexuality, sexual aggression, and violence. Obviously a huge problem. Sex should not be violent. It can be between consenting adults. It can be different things, but violent and certainly abusive is not one of them. Okay, so we're going to talk about rape. What is the myths and truths about rape, college or campuses, what happens on college campuses, and what we should be doing to help alleviate this problem. We're going to talk about child abuse, and how, what that means to the world. Sexual harassment, you haven't gone much into the work community yet, but when you do, this is a huge topic and a huge problem in so many places. We'll talk about marriage and rape, which two words most people don't put together very often. So we're going to talk about so here we are. So as it says, excuse me, allergies, not virus. Sorry, don't worry. I had sniffles and sneezing long before there was a virus. Since I moved to the valley. Anyway, so wife rape and spousal rape was really never a topic, and just not people didn't consider it, even if a husband forced his wife to have sex, right? And in some places, so it wasn't until 1996, right, just 24 years ago, that became illegal in most states. And here you say, and as you can see, even California has some exceptions to the law in marital rape for husbands. It is not the same as the states in white, including Texas and some ones you wouldn't consider, where rape is rape, and it doesn't matter who the perpetrator is. Rape is sexual assault, basically. Whatever somebody does not want done to them, that is done to them. All states and counties, and obviously that's the case with any law. Definitions of any law, typically along, this is not something like the Supreme Court of the United States has defined yet, right? So there's variations along the way. And everything is about consent. There's no consent, it is rape. And these are the things that usually, when we talked about those, like different things in the law, and some of these are true and some of these are just myths, but most of them have some validity, right? Obviously. So here is the victim relationships between victims, right? And so 50% of forcible rape is done by intimate partners. Does not always mean a husband, right? Cohabitation, anybody you're in a relationship with and have been in a relationship with, right? 12% by family members, drug or alcohol facilitated, and forcible rape. Obviously, the rest are by people you know. So if you look at this across the board, right, 91.9% of forcible rape is done by people that you know. And men being raped is not a topic that's talked a lot about, but it certainly happens, and it's often done by other men, men raping men. And unfortunately, of course, prison is a huge, where most of the men and much of this goes on, right? But it still happens out in society regularly, just very underreported because, of course, men don't want to be reporting this. And here's rape statistics across the board. They've gone down a little bit, but certainly not near enough in the last, and this only goes up to 2012. So, of course, right, this is the whole thing, women, the way they dress, like why, if they don't want to be looked at, if they don't want to be touched, why are they dressing so sexily? Let's blame the victim. Men are unable to control their urges, right? They're mentally ill. And of course, the less and almost never true is women want to be raped. So women are not supposed to dress like this because this is what tells us that they are looking for sex, right? Which is just true. And they certainly aren't looking to, they may be willing to have sex, but they certainly are not willing to be raped. Women can resist. More myths, right? Women falsely are accusing men of rape. As we've seen, most 90% of the rapes are not committed by strangers. I don't believe all men are capable of rape. It takes a certain type of mentality to get physically excited by that type of interaction. And yes, of course, women can have an orgasm during rape, but that has nothing to do, nothing that they can control. And then women can submit just to save their lives oftentimes. So they feel so threatened that they submit, which is, it must be a terrible feeling. So as we said before, just like in the slide, rape on campus is way too often an occurrence. And it's always typically somebody you know. The victims are the youngest, most vulnerable part of the campus population. And even though there's a lot of drinking going on, it does not excuse unwanted sex. And then, of course, there's not just on campus, but in clubs after this, young adults or people in their 20s, unfortunately, clubbing and all that have been the victim of date rape drugs, roofies, GHB, ketamine, all sedative type drugs, right? So GHB is a sleeping pill used as a pre-anesthetic, actually, for its legitimate use in hospitals. And the same with ketamine is an actually strong anesthetic, sedative. And roofies, hyphenol, is actually not legal in the United States at all. Right, so, but they are odorless, tasteless. Somebody drops them into your drink, hands you a drink that already contains that, and takes advantage of an incapacitated person. Most people do not report, right? Rape is underreported no matter where you are, but on campus that seems to be a bigger case. And then there seems to be a culture of rape where athletes feel, often there's an entitlement, a feeling of entitlement among groups, not just athletes. I'm not just going to single out athletes, but they often get the brunt of the blame, along with the fraternities, where a lot of drinking and such goes on. Right? And then here we are, female victims of rape by age group. And as you can see, the 25 to 34, so most of it occurs after college. In the military, we have a problem with that too. So women have become much more much more of a larger group inside the military, and that's brought in many of its the same issues in a micro society, let's say, right? So the military is like a microcosm of society. It's its own little society with its own little issues and problems, rape being one of them, in a very male-dominated system, and some of whom are not appreciative of women being in the military. But of course, if you are raped, please report. Take care of yourself, get medical care, and seek therapy. So men, of course, are the biggest perpetrators of rape. And it's our job to do our best to contribute to the reduction in rape, right? And part of that is through teaching, hopefully, right? Hopefully my sons are respectful of women. I've taught them to be respectful of women and to treat women appropriately. And then finally, of course, that no means no. As you remember in kids, those young men were not taught to, or did not, if they were taught, they didn't grasp a lesson of not treating women as sexual objects. I want to go back here. I want to go back right here. Oh, I see. I want to talk about, before we get off the topic of rape, I want to bring up a thing about one of the things that, rape. So I'm going to talk about the Hindi film industry. So in the New Delhi movie hall is showing a Hindi film. I won't insult people by trying to pronounce the name in Hindi, but here the movie, the title is Don't Confront Me. A predominantly male audience watches transfixed as a teen serves two lusty sons of a rich landlord and cornering a pretty well-endowed maid in their plush bedroom. Let me go, she implores, but the men's hands move toward her writhing body. When the deed is done, the audience lets out a barely audible sigh of relief. Or is it pleasure? For Ashok Rawat, 28, a building contractor, it is the latter. He says rape is enjoyable because in men's fantasies, force is the only way to get women who are otherwise out of reach. He is one of 15 million Indians who stream into movie theaters every day to enter the fantasy world of Hindi cinema. Though it includes song, dance, tragedy, comedy, and love in all films, for several years, a rape scene has been all but a requisite ingredient. Posters for English language films advertise things as, for the first time, see underwater rape scenes. So it is not just, this is a worldwide problem, and this is how it's perpetrated to go on. Feeding fantasies, that this is the belief and fantasy about how to treat women. All right, we're going to move on to child abuse, which is no less popular or nice of a topic, right? And how we do this. So pedophilia, child molestation, and incest, right? Abusers do not need to use force against children typically. Um, So characteristics of the abuser are shy, immature males, younger males, right? They're aroused by children and they're afraid of adults. They're afraid of trying to have sex with adults. Usually they have other compounding psychological issues. Many of, oftentimes is being a victim of child abuse themselves. They are isolated often and not the most successful people. And very insecure, right? And this talks about how many, so 26%, and over almost 65% of people are parents or other types of relatives. That's a terribly disturbing figure. Of course, like everything else that goes on, it is undistorted. Most of the victims are females, but not often, not all, of course. But it's 20% of women have been, or young girls have been sexually abused, and 7% for young men. And then, of course, right, this causes a huge problems for a child who's been molested, right? Because often, you know, a lot of psychological issues, and then, of course, if non-resolved psychological issues cause problems in their adulthood, which again then could make them abusers, and unfortunately often does. And then, of course, the medical consequences that go along when children are abused to the point where they're physically, they require medical attention. And as I said, this goes on unresolved, and often, way too often unresolved, because they don't get the care and treatment that they need. It continues on to adulthood, causing much distress throughout life, throughout their lifespan. So reducing, talking about ways to reduce, unfortunately, there aren't very many effective therapies for people in the penal system or anywhere for sexual abusers, pedophiles, right? There are some medical interventions that can happen, but are not across the board, and of course there's a lot of controversy surrounding that, right? And then, of course, there's many of these laws have been put into place over the last 40 years or so. Megan's Law and Jessica's Law. And of course, you know, I spent a lot of time with our daughters, especially teaching them to scream and teaching them to run, teaching them that any interaction that anytime they felt afraid, to make sure everybody around them knew that. And luckily we didn't have any issues with that. And then sexual harassment, as I said earlier, like many of you, may or may not be that far into the workforce yet, but in the workforce, this is a huge problem. We do trainings annually for managers or people in a position as myself. It becomes a very thing because of this very thing, quid pro quo. I can do something for you if you do something for me. And you know, you protect yourself. You make sure you're never in a position where you could be accused of anything like that. I'm very aware of this or you are perpetrating it. You know. So of course, a lot of people end up sexually harassing people, and it comes as a variety of things. Harassment is anything people feels like harassing them. A photo, a joke. It's not just actual unwanted sexual advantages, but it's subtle, or much more subtle things that people don't often consider. And of course, it causes the same type of, like any kind of abuse, like people feel abused. People are traumatized by sexual harassment, in which case all these things come along with that. Psychological problems, distress, anxiety causes these kind of issues. Especially when they feel unprotected and unsupported. No. So sexual harassment, you will learn much more about it, I imagine, as you grow older and expand your world. So that is the end of chapter 13. And we have come to the end of the lecture. So please get rid of this now. You got your journal topic, you got the your lessons. Do your journaling, 2 journals, right? One for each chapter, not one for the week, but one for each chapter. And good luck to you. And one more lecture on chapters 14 and 15, and one last exam, and we are done for the year. Stay safe.